Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains just nuts, mad, in fact. And today, we are going to discuss more mad science experiments. Except this time, we're going with cars. I haven't done a list of cars in a while. I actually only did one of those. And it did alright, fair enough. And, to continue the trend of making lists featuring products of unspeakable scientific progress, but without filthy things like ethical restraints, let's talk about 5 cars that are clearly just mad science experiments. The Peugeot Moovie. I am so glad I looked at the pronunciation of Peugeot because it's French, and I would have completely butchered that. It would have been something like Peugeot or something ridiculous, not even close to how you actually say it, because the French language hates me. It's a personal thing. I don't know why. Anyway, the Peugeot Moovie is a concept car, and a lot of concept cars are pretty weird, which is kind of why I put it low on the list, but I couldn't ignore it because does that not look like, to any of you, maybe it's just me, to any of you, does that not look like an escape pod for some kind of supervillain? I mean, it's not that far off from Dr. Eggman's Eggmobile, okay? That's what it looks like. I'm just saying. This was revealed in 2005 at the International Motor Show, Germany, and it was a winner of the 2004 Peugeot Concours Design competition. It was actually designed by a 23-year-old Portuguese university student named Andre Costa, and it's a 2-door, 2-seat city car. Calling it a car may be a little bit loose, but it is technically that, but man, I don't know about this one, you guys. The whole thing is mostly glass, at least when it comes to the outer shell. It's held together by a chrome trim that's along the panoramic windshield. The interior is apparently very spacious and comfortable, so that's something. But I just can't see this being that safe. To me, like, it's meant to be an economical car, environmentally friendly. A lot of those little e-cars are designed to be as small as possible, so they use less fuel. I get that point. But, I'm just stuck on the glass idea here. 'Cause in an accident, this whole thing is going to shatter. And shattered glass is kind of, painful. Like, it's sharp. That would be bad. I'm just saying. Maybe there's a reason why it never entered production, and maybe that is the reason. It's certainly futuristic, and I give the designer props for imagination, but I just can't see it ever functioning with the way roads work, at least right now. The Amphicar Model 770. Amphicar? What, like an amphibian? Yeah, actually, it's very literal that way. Oh yes, this is an amphibious automobile that was launched in the 1961 New York Auto Show. It was manufactured in West Germany and marketed from 1961 to 1968. It was designed by Hans Trippel, and it was manufactured by the Quant Group at Lübeck and at Berlin-Borstigwald. They were never that prevalent, as a little less than 4,000 wound up being built, but it's a kind of neat idea. On the surface, it seems like a bit of an odd-looking but normal convertible, but as the underside may give away, it's also meant to function as a boat, which it does. Its engine had a power output of 43 horsepower, and it was fairly reliable, but the biggest problem with them and why they never got very popular was that there's just very few people that really could take advantage of them, and they weren't really that good in either form. They weren't a very good boat, and they weren't a very good car. They were just fine. They could only go about 7 knots in the water and 70 miles per hour, or 110 kilometers an hour, on land. Additionally, though it used propellers while it was in the water, it still steered with the front tires, which, due to the way they're angled in the water, technically made it turn, but not nearly as good as a proper rudder would. Ultimately, they wound up looking like something that's kind of a novelty. It's neat, absolutely, without question, but would you really want one? Or if you're wealthy enough, would you just rather invest in a really good car and a really good boat? Putting both in one can result in a poor version of either or. That's kind of the case with the Model 770. I like it, I do. It just never really turned out that great. The Leyat Hélica. There's also the Helico, depending on the model. Also, no. Are we really doing this again? What, we tried it with cars too? Can we just not do this? Okay, maybe you can defend the trains. Maybe you can do that. Because maybe in that case, they're on the track. It's fine. Just put a cover over it. It won't be a big deal. And hey, there's a cover over this one. Yeah, that's wonderful. Right up until the first accident, when that propeller goes flying off into oblivion and decapitates somebody. Look, no, this is a bad idea. It was always a bad idea. There's a reason we don't do this. But, in Leyat's defense, it was pretty early. Leyat was a French automobile manufacturer that was established in 1919 in Paris by Marcel Leyat. The Hélica was their first model, produced in 1921. It was marketed as the plane without wings, which, yeah, that's great. That's not a plane, though. Never mind. The passengers actually sat behind each other like in an aircraft, and it was steered using the rear wheels. The vehicle was made of plywood, oh boy, and weighed just 250 kilograms, 550 pounds, which made it dangerously fast. In 1927, a Hélica actually hit 106 miles per hour, 171 kilometers an hour. That doesn't sound fast by modern standards, because most sedans can technically go faster, but this was in the 1920s, and they were made out of plywood. It is not the same thing. For a variety of reasons, they never took off. For one thing, it just wasn't very much fun to operate. The propeller is in the front, so it's always pushing the wind right in the driver's face. There was, of course, a version with an enclosed cabin, but this was in the early days, when a lot of roads were still, well, dirt, and the propeller tended to throw all the dirt into the windshield, because of course it did. With a plane, this isn't a problem because the plane's in the sky, but this car was always on the ground. Plus, it was just seen as kind of dangerous. I mean, duh, can you imagine if a bunch of people were driving these around on the freeway these days? Oh my goodness. Or what if you hit a pedestrian? This is a serious question that requires a serious answer. The Chrysler Turbine Car. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you ever do that? This is a two-door hardtop coupe, but it's powered by a turbine engine. Like, what? Chrysler, what are you doing? This thing was built between 1963 and 1964, and a total of 55 were made. Chrysler had already been working on turbine engines since the 30s for aviation applications because, yeah, that's fair. But other members of the research team started working on the idea of putting a turbine in a car. In this case, it was called the Chrysler A-831 gas turbine. Now, looking into it as a concept probably isn't the worst idea in the world, because there are some advantages to this. For one thing, turbines actually have less moving parts than conventional piston engines, and they can run on a variety of fuels. And people were intrigued by it. During the program, they actually wound up putting the engine in a few different models of vehicle, not just this coupe. And during the public test phase, they actually did okay in some ways. For one thing, they were a lot more durable in comparison to piston engines, and the cars ran very smooth and vibration-free. Also, they had reduced maintenance and an ease of starting in different conditions. However, it had a lot of problems too. For one thing, the drivers shouldn't use leaded gasoline, because though it would work, the leaded fuel would actually leave debilitating deposits in the engine. This is a huge issue because that was the most common fuel available. They also had really awful acceleration, just atrocious. Their fuel efficiency was actually really bad as well. And they were loud, like really loud. I mean, they're turbines, of course they're loud. Chrysler actually kept tinkering with the idea until the 70s though, even creating 5th and 6th generations of the engine. But by that point, emissions regulations were coming into play, and the turbines didn't meet them. Plus their fuel economy was really bad, and it was the 70s. There was an oil embargo going on. It really wasn't a good time to even attempt to sell something that took more fuel than a conventional car, and didn't even meet emission standards anyway. The Sir Vival. What the heck is that monstrosity? Yes, okay, we've hit peak mad science here. I don't even know where to begin. Is that thing hinged? Articulated? What? There's a lot to unpack here, apparently. It was created by Walter C. Jerome of Worcester, Massachusetts in 1958. Jerome created what he termed as a revolutionary vehicle. Because of course he said that. Because he was concerned about what he saw as a lack of concern for safety and focus on planned obsolescence. This vehicle was never produced commercially, because of course it wasn't. But it did feature a lot of innovation. And not all the ideas that went into it were bad, mostly involving the safety of the vehicle, which was a big focus of Jerome. This car had seat belts, a roll cage, sliding side doors, rubber bumpers, and side lights. Many of these you probably recognize as things that are standard, but back in the 50s, not so much. But the most distinctive feature, I think, would be that hinge. The car is put together in a two-part construction that separates the engine and the front wheels from the main passenger cab via that articulated universal joint. The driver's seat was known as the driver turret. The driver of this vehicle sat in a single elevated seat that was actually 3 feet above the level of the rear passenger seat. This was meant to increase visibility, and the windshield of the vehicle was a cylinder of glass about 1 foot high and 4 feet in circumference. The whole point of that hinge, though, was actually, well, a safety feature, believe it or not. The thought was that in a front or side collision, the sections would articulate around the vertical axis and absorb the critical shock of the collision. I'm not 100% on how well that would necessarily go, but it was nice that he was thinking of safety more than anything else. Jerome wound up creating the Hollow Boring Corporation of Worcester and spent many years looking for purchasers and financing for his product. He displayed the vehicle at many events, such as the International Auto Show and the 1964 New York World's Fair, and he received publicity in Life magazine, as well as automotive-focused publications such as Mechanics Illustrated and Motor Trend. Press wasn't overly positive, but they weren't overly negative either. They simply said, hey, this is a thing that might exist. It's interesting. Take a look at it. Which isn't necessarily bad for a new idea. What happened? Well, nothing. Jerome just never got the funding. People were really indifferent to the project and no one wanted to invest. As a result, the prototype is the only one that exists. Would it have ever worked if it was put into production? I doubt it, to be honest. It's just a little too weird, I think, for most people. It may have been safer, sure, but people, when they buy cars, are often looking for style points. And this thing, well, it ain't no Dodge Charger, if you get my meaning. In fact, it kind of looks like the Homer car, now that I think about it, doesn't it? It just dawned on me while I was recording, this isn't even in the script here. And with that, a special thank you to all my underwater train finders. Thomas Ward, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Royal Hudson 2860, Lord Hoth 444, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mr. Black Rose, Master of None, Josh Johnson, Metal for Life Guy, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, DM Tribal Typhoon, Tommy Rossini, Ohio Trucker 1, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Joshua Long, Alaric Jaspers, Bri Dagger 8, Twin Fox, Jack Carson's Railroad Videos, and Major Klutz. Till next time, this is Darkness, a visual of fond farewell.